On the way home after picking up his son, a black mechanic stops to help a woman stranded beside a luxury car. Expecting nothing in return, he's caught off guard when she asks for his number. A few days later, a call from a powerful automotive company changes everything, offering him a job he never dared to dream of. But stepping through those glass doors will test more than just his skills. It will challenge everything he believes about himself. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the quiet suburban road. The air was crisp, filled with a distant hum of cicadas and the occasional rustling of dry leaves. Marcus Carter drove steadily, his hands firm on the wheel of his old pickup truck as the engine rumbled beneath him. The truck had seen better days, but it was reliable, just like him. Seated in the back, 8-year-old Noah Carter swung his legs absently, his backpack beside him half unzipped from his rush to leave school. "Dad, guess what? Mrs. Johnson said I have the best handwriting in class," he announced, his voice bright with excitement. Marcus glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his lips twitching into a small smile. "That's so. Maybe I should let you start writing up my invoices at the shop then," he teased. Noah giggled, puffing out his chest proudly. "I bet I'd do a better job than you." Their laughter filled the truck, a brief escape from the weight that Marcus carried daily, bills to pay, repairs to make, meals to cook. But no matter how tight things got, he never let it show around Noah. As they rounded a bend in the road, Marcus's sharp eyes caught sight of a Rolls-Royce idling on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking rhythmically against the encroaching twilight. A woman stood beside it, her arms wrapped around herself, clearly underdressed for the crisp autumn air. She was speaking into her phone, but even from a distance, Marcus could see the frustration etched into her features. Noah leaned forward, peering through the windshield. "Dad, look! That car is so cool, but why is she just standing there?" Marcus exhaled slowly. They should be heading home. Dinner still needed making, and his back ached from a long day under the hood of customers' cars. But something about the sight gnawed at him. Maybe it was the way she was pacing, or the subtle slouch of her shoulders. He pulled the truck to a stop a few feet behind the car and turned to Noah. "Stay put, buddy," he said firmly, opening the door. The cold air rushed in as he stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel. The woman turned at the sound, her dark brown eyes meeting his, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face before she adjusted her posture. She was striking. Tall, poised, with a presence that suggested she wasn't used to waiting around on the side of the road for help. "Evening," Marcus greeted, keeping his tone even. "Car trouble?" She exhaled, clearly exasperated. "Yes, it just stopped. I was on a call and the engine cut out. I tried restarting it, but nothing." Marcus nodded, stepping closer. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "Please, roadside assistance said it'll take at least an hour, and I really don't have that kind of time." Marcus popped the hood and leaned in, his practiced hands moving through the sophisticated engine. This was no regular car. This was a high-end machine, miles away from the trucks and sedans he usually worked on, but a car was a car, and he understood their language better than he did most people. As he worked, Noah unbuckled his seatbelt and slid out of the truck, shuffling closer. "Is it really broken, Dad?" he asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Marcus chuckled softly, glancing over his shoulder. "Not broken, just a little confused. Kind of like when you wake up late and can't find your socks." Noah grinned, and the woman, who had been standing stiffly, let out a quiet laugh, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "That your son?" she asked, watching as Noah stepped closer to peer into the open hood. "Yeah," Marcus said, tightening a bolt. "Noah, say hi." "Hi," Noah said brightly. "You have a really cool car." The woman's lips curved into a small smile. "Thank you. I'm Isabella." She hesitated, then extended a hand toward Noah, who shook it with enthusiasm. "Nice to meet you, Miss Isabella. My dad can fix anything." Isabella's gaze shifted back to Marcus, watching the way he worked. Steady, methodical, confident. She had met plenty of men in polished suits, the kind who spoke in numbers and contracts, but this man was different. There was something reassuring about him, something solid. Even in worn jeans and grease-streaked hands, there was an undeniable sense of responsibility in the way he carried himself. After a few more minutes, Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back. "All right, try it now." Isabella slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life effortlessly. Relief flooded her face as she looked up at Marcus. "You're a lifesaver." Marcus shook his head. "Just doing what I know." She reached into her purse. "Let me at least pay you for your time." Marcus held up a hand. "No need, just glad I could help." Isabella studied him for a moment, then nodded. "At least let me get your number, in case I ever need a real mechanic." Marcus hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of handing out his number to strangers, but there was something about Isabella, something genuine in her tone. With a slight shrug, he recited the digits and she saved them in her phone. As she prepared to drive off, Noah tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Dad, I think she's nice." Marcus chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "Maybe. Let's get home, kiddo." As Isabella's car disappeared down the road, Marcus climbed back into his truck. But something about the encounter lingered in his mind, like the scent of motor oil that never quite washed off. He didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness was about to set into motion something far greater than he could have ever imagined. The following afternoon, Marcus stood beneath the flickering fluorescent lights of Carter's Auto Repair, the scent of motor oil thick in the air. His hands, stained with grease, worked deftly as he tightened the last bolt on an old sedan. The job was routine, familiar, nothing like the high-end machine he had tinkered with the day before. But his mind kept circling back to that moment, to the woman in the sleek car, and the way she had watched him, as if seeing something others never did. Noah sat nearby, perched on an overturned milk crate, kicking his feet absently as he scribbled in a battered notebook. "Dad, do you think we'll ever have a fancy car like that lady's?" he asked, his voice filled with innocent curiosity. Marcus smirked, wiping his hands on a rag before tossing it onto the workbench. "Well, buddy, I don't think a car like that would last long in a place like this." He gestured around at the dusty garage, the chipped paint on the walls, the aging tools that had seen better days. Noah shrugged, unconcerned. "I still think your truck is cooler," he said, and Marcus chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. The bell above the shop's entrance jingled, and Marcus turned, expecting a customer. Instead, standing in the doorway, framed by the golden light of late afternoon, was Isabella Sinclair. She was dressed more casually than before, dark jeans, a fitted coat, but she still carried that same effortless confidence. In her hands was a small woven basket wrapped in cellophane, tied with a red ribbon. Noah's face lit up. "Miss Isabella." Isabella smiled, stepping further inside. "Hey there, Noah," she greeted before turning her gaze to Marcus. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Marcus wiped his hands again, straightening slightly. "Not at all. What brings you out here?" She lifted the basket slightly. "I wanted to say thank you. I figured the least I could do was bring something by." Marcus hesitated before reaching out to take it. The basket was warm in his hands, the scent of fresh baked goods drifting from within. "You really didn't have to," he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "Maybe not," Isabella replied, tilting her head slightly. "But I wanted to." Noah had already scrambled off his crate, peering eagerly into the basket. "What is it?" "Cookies, muffins, and some of my grandmother's homemade jam," Isabella said. Noah gasped dramatically. "Dad, we have to keep her." Marcus let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Sounds like you've won him over." Isabella smiled, but as she looked around the shop, her expression shifted slightly, taking in the details. The aging equipment, the faded posters curling at the edges, the patched-up workbench. She could see it now. What kind of man Marcus was. Someone who worked with his hands, who took care of what he had, who made things last. There was something admirable in that, something rare. "This place. It's yours, isn't it?" she asked, her voice softer now. Marcus nodded, setting the basket down. "Yeah, been running it for years. Bought it back when things were easier." She glanced at him. What happened? Marcus hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly. It wasn't something he talked about often, especially not with strangers, but there was something about Isabella's presence, calm, genuine, that made him want to answer. "My wife passed away," he said finally, his voice even but quiet. "Car accident. Noah was just a baby then. After that, everything changed. I stopped thinking about big plans, just focused on making sure he was okay." A flicker of something passed through Isabella's eyes. Sympathy, understanding. "That's a lot for one person to carry," she said. Marcus shrugged. "You do what you have to." For a moment silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of passing traffic. Then the bell jingled again as the door swung open and a man stepped inside. He was in his mid-40s, his button-down slightly wrinkled, his hands wringing together nervously. "Marcus," the man greeted, "that rattling sound's back again." "All right, Dave," Marcus said, slipping easily back into work mode. "Let's take a look." As Marcus led the man outside, Isabella watched him go, something settling in her mind. A few minutes later Marcus returned, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Fixed?" Isabella asked. "Loose belt," Marcus replied. "Nothing serious." Isabella studied him for a moment. "You don't just fix cars," she said finally. "You take care of people, too." Marcus, caught off guard by the remark, let out a small chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess. Just seems like the right thing to do." Isabella nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at the clock on the wall. "I should get going, but Marcus—" She hesitated, as if weighing her next words. "Have you ever thought about doing more with this place? Expanding? Upgrading?" Marcus let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Sure, back when I first started. But dreams don't pay the bills, and they sure as hell don't raise kids." Isabella held his gaze, her expression unreadable. "What if you had the chance to make it happen?" Marcus frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She smiled, almost playfully. "That depends." She straightened, adjusting the strap of her purse. "Thanks for letting me stop by." "Any time," Marcus said, though her words lingered in the air long after she stepped out the door. As Isabella's car pulled away, Noah peeked out from the office, watching through the window. "Dad," he said, his voice full of curiosity, "are we going to see her again?" Marcus exhaled, running a hand over his face before glancing down at his son. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Maybe, kiddo," he said. "You never know." But something told him this wouldn't be the last time Isabella Sinclair crossed his path. The next morning, Marcus was halfway through replacing a timing belt when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it at first, figuring it was just another bill reminder or a customer checking on their car. But when it rang again a few seconds later, a prickle of unease crept up his spine. He wiped his hands on a rag before pulling out his phone, frowning at the unknown number flashing across the screen. "This is Marcus," he answered cautiously, tucking the phone between his shoulder and ear as he grabbed a wrench. A polished, professional voice came through the line. "Mr. Carter, this is Claire Bennett, hiring coordinator for Jackson Automotive Group. I'm reaching out on behalf of our CEO, Isabella Sinclair. She mentioned you specifically, and we'd like to invite you in for an interview for a managerial position in our technical division." Marcus froze, the wrench slipping slightly in his grip. He had to have misheard. "I think there's been a mistake," he said slowly. "I'm just a small-town mechanic. I don't have—" Claire cut in smoothly. "Miss Sinclair is familiar with your work and believes you'd be an excellent candidate. If you're available, we'd love to meet with you Wednesday at 10 a.m. Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. He had spent the last decade with his head down, grinding, doing what needed to be done to keep food on the table. Corporate job interviews weren't in his playbook. But the way Isabella had looked at him yesterday, the weight in her words. What if you had the chance to make it happen? It suddenly made sense. He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "All right," he finally said. "I'll be there." That evening, as he and Noah sat at their small kitchen table, Marcus barely touched his plate, his mind still stuck on the phone call. Across from him, Noah chattered about school, his fork waving through the air as he animatedly recounted a kickball game. But eventually the 8-year-old noticed his father's silence and paused mid-bite. "Dad, what's wrong?" Noah asked, his brows pulling together. Marcus looked up, forcing a small smile. Got a call today. Someone wants me to interview for a big job. Noah's eyes widened. Like a real big job? With suits and ties? Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. I doubt I'll be wearing a tie, but yeah, something like that. Noah grinned. Are they going to pay you more so we can get extra snacks? Marcus let out a real laugh this time, reaching over to ruffle his son's curls. Maybe. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But later that night, after Noah had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone at the table, staring at his reflection in the dark window. He wasn't the type to chase dreams. Dreams were for people who had the luxury of falling and getting back up again. For people who didn't have mouths to feed, rent to pay, responsibilities pressing down on their shoulders like cinder blocks. Still, something about the offer gnawed at him. He thought of Isabella standing in his shop, her keen eyes taking in every detail, seeing something in him that he had stopped seeing in himself a long time ago. By the time Wednesday morning rolled around, Marcus found himself standing in front of Jackson Automotive's headquarters, staring up at the towering glass building that gleamed under the late morning sun. The place was a world away from the grease-streaked floors and rusted toolboxes he was used to. He adjusted his shirt, one of the few clean ones he owned, and exhaled deeply before stepping inside. The lobby was pristine, all sleek lines and polished marble. As Marcus checked in at the front desk, he was keenly aware of the well-dressed men and women who moved through the space with purpose, barely sparing him a glance. He followed an assistant to a private elevator, his boots squeaking slightly against the shiny floors. The higher they ascended, the more out of place he felt. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Marcus stepped out into an expansive office lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He barely had a chance to take it all in before a familiar voice greeted him. "Mr. Carter," Isabella said smoothly, walking toward him with her hand extended. "Glad you could make it." Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm despite the unease creeping through him. "Didn't think I had much of a choice," he admitted. Isabella smirked, leading him toward a sleek conference room where a spread of documents and diagrams lay neatly arranged. "You always have a choice," she said. "I just made sure you saw this one." Marcus sat stiffly as Isabella took her seat across from him. "I'll be honest," he said, crossing his arms. "I don't get why I'm here. I fix cars. I don't run companies." Isabella leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "You're not just a mechanic, Marcus. You're resourceful, hard-working, and you actually care about your work, about people. That's rare, and it's exactly what we need here." Marcus scoffed, shaking his head. "I don't have a fancy degree or corporate experience. You've got a whole room of people more qualified than me." "Maybe," Isabella said, unfazed. "But qualifications don't always mean capability. You see things others don't. That's what makes you valuable." Marcus looked down at his hands. Calloused, rough, hands that had spent years covered in grease and sweat. Hands that had built a life, however small, however simple. "This isn't me," he admitted quietly. Isabella studied him for a moment, then leaned back in her chair. "Maybe it isn't, but maybe it could be. Just think about it." The interview wrapped up soon after, but as Marcus walked back through the pristine halls, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into a world that was never meant for him. That night, as he tucked Noah into bed, his son blinked sleepily up at him. "Did they say yes?" Marcus hesitated, raking a hand over his face. "I don't know, but it's a big change." Noah frowned, then mumbled through a yawn. "You always tell me to try new things, even if they're scary." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "You got me there." Noah smiled, his eyes already drifting shut. "Then you have to try, Dad." Marcus sat there for a long moment, staring at his son's peaceful face. He had spent years teaching Noah to be brave, to take chances, to believe in himself. Maybe it was time he took his own advice. He exhaled, glancing toward the folded business card Isabella had given him, still sitting on the nightstand. "All right," he murmured. "I'll try." Marcus stepped into the pristine, glass-walled office of Jackson Automotive on his first day, feeling like a man who had wandered into the wrong room but was too stubborn to leave. Everything about the place screamed efficiency. Men in pressed suits strode with purpose, conversations hummed in clipped professional tones, and the air carried the faint scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee. It was a world away from the smell of motor oil and steel he was used to. His boots felt too heavy against the polished floors, his calloused hands out of place among the sleek tablet screens and spotless desks. Claire, the hiring coordinator who had first called him, greeted him with a polite smile and led him through the onboarding process. The paperwork was straightforward, but as she explained his role, Marcus felt a creeping sense of unease. He wasn't just here to oversee maintenance. Jackson Automotive expected him to optimize workflows, troubleshoot high-tech vehicle systems, and bridge the gap between the corporate engineers and the mechanics on the ground. It was more than just fixing cars. It was changing how they were built. And that was new territory for him. As he stepped into the department, all eyes turned toward him. Some were merely curious, but others carried something sharper: doubt, skepticism. "Everyone, this is Marcus Carter," Claire announced. "He'll be working as a technical manager starting today." A few nods, a few murmured greetings, but one voice cut through the quiet. "You're the new manager?" The words came from a man leaning against a desk near the back of the room. He was in his early 40s, tall, with sharp blue eyes and the kind of smirk that made it clear he had already sized Marcus up and found him lacking. "Didn't realize we were hiring outside the usual talent pool." Marcus didn't miss the way the other engineers shifted uncomfortably, or how a few exchanged glances but said nothing. He had been around long enough to know exactly what that meant. "Ethan Monroe," Claire interjected quickly, her tone neutral. "Marcus, Ethan is the head of our senior engineering team. You'll be working closely together." Marcus met Ethan's gaze evenly. "Nice to meet you," he said, extending a hand. Ethan didn't take it. Instead, he gave a pointed glance at Marcus's work boots and worn jeans before shrugging. "Guess I was expecting someone with a different background." Marcus let his hand drop, feeling a familiar heat crawl up his spine. He knew exactly what Ethan meant. "Background doesn't mean much if you can't do the job," Marcus replied, keeping his tone even. Ethan smirked, tilting his head slightly. "That's true. Let's hope you can keep up." Marcus clenched his jaw but didn't rise to the bait. He had dealt with men like Ethan before, the ones who spoke in measured insults, who never said anything outright but made sure you felt it anyway. He could handle it. He always had. The day only got worse from there. Meetings flew by in a blur of jargon-heavy discussions, with engineers rattling off technical terms faster than Marcus could process. He understood cars, how they moved, breathed, functioned, but the corporate structure, the endless graphs and spreadsheets, the polished presentations filled with buzzwords, that was foreign territory. At lunch, he sat alone in the break room, trying to wrap his head around the avalanche of information thrown at him. He had barely taken a bite of his sandwich when he overheard two voices from the hallway. "I don't get it," one man muttered. "There are dozens of qualified guys out there, and they hire him? A mechanic from nowhere?" "Yeah," another voice chimed in. "You think Sinclair's got some kind of charity program going on?" Laughter followed, low and mean. Marcus sat frozen for a second, gripping the edge of the table. He had expected pushback, but hearing it out loud, being dismissed so easily, like he hadn't spent years breaking his back under hoods, like his knowledge wasn't earned, made something in his chest tighten. That evening, as he walked through the front door of his home, Noah looked up from the floor where he was assembling a model car. "Hey, Dad, how was it?" Marcus forced a smile, ruffling his son's curls. "Long day, kiddo?" Noah tilted his head. "Was it fun?" Marcus hesitated. Fun wasn't the word he'd use. It was different. Noah studied him for a second, then scrambled to his feet. "Wait here," he said, before disappearing into his room. A moment later he returned, holding a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," he said, handing it over. Marcus unfolded it, his throat tightening slightly as he took in the words written in uneven crayon strokes. "You're the best fixer ever." Below it was a simple drawing, him and Noah standing in front of a car, both smiling. Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest easing just a little. Thanks, bud, he murmured. Noah grinned. You got this, Dad. Later that night, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table, flipping through pages of technical manuals, he thought about Ethan's smirk, the whispered comments, the doubt in everyone's eyes. He had walked into Jackson Automotive feeling like an outsider, and they had made sure he knew it. But he wasn't going to let them be right. He grabbed a notepad and started jotting down questions, making notes of everything he didn't understand. If they thought he wouldn't keep up, they were in for a surprise. By the time he finally turned off the lights, a quiet determination had settled over him. He didn't just owe it to himself to prove them wrong. He owed it to Noah, to the kid who believed in him, even when he wasn't sure he believed in himself. 2 weeks into the job, Marcus had learned to keep his head down. He worked harder than anyone, stayed later than most, and spent his nights poring over manuals and reports until his eyes burned. He refused to be the guy they whispered about in the break room, the one they thought didn't belong. But no matter how much effort he put in, the weight of being an outsider never quite left his shoulders. The engineers still talked around him rather than to him, meetings remained a blur of corporate jargon, and Ethan Monroe never missed an opportunity to remind him that he was playing in a league above his skill set. The tension came to a head on a Thursday afternoon. The entire technical team was crammed into a glass-walled conference room, seated around a sleek, polished table. At the front of the room, a massive screen displayed a series of graphs and schematics. The discussion had been going in circles for the past 20 minutes, engineers throwing out theories, solutions, and counter-arguments, none of them leading anywhere. The problem was simple but devastating. One of Jackson Automotive's newest models had a critical flaw in its suspension system. Vehicles were failing safety tests, the ride stability inconsistent at higher speeds. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the smugness in his expression barely concealed. The data's clear, he said. There's no quick fix. We need to delay the launch and go back to testing. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, silent, studying the numbers on the screen. He knew what delaying meant. Millions lost, contracts pushed back, the kind of corporate mess he wasn't used to but could tell was disastrous. But more than that, he knew cars. He knew how they worked, how they felt. And something about this didn't add up. Isabella, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. Delaying the launch isn't an option unless we exhaust every possible solution, she said, her voice even but firm. There has to be another way. Ethan exhaled sharply. With all due respect, Isabella, we've analyzed every angle. No, Marcus cut in, his voice steady but carrying enough weight to turn heads. A silence settled over the room as all eyes shifted toward him. He could feel Ethan's irritation prickling in the air, but he ignored it. We're looking at this the wrong way. The problem isn't in the design itself, it's in the calibration of the suspension system. It's too rigid, too optimized for perfect conditions, which isn't how real roads work. Ethan scoffed. And you figured this out how, exactly? Marcus tapped a finger against the screen, pointing at the fluctuating stability readings. Because I've seen this before. Not in a lab, but in the real world. The system is fighting against itself because it doesn't have enough give. We're treating it like a mechanical issue when it's really an adjustment issue. We need to recalibrate the suspension settings, not redesign the entire thing. A few engineers leaned forward, murmuring to each other as they re-examined the data. Ethan, however, let out a short, humorless laugh. That's a bold assumption, and what if you're wrong? You really want to gamble the entire launch on a theory? Marcus met his gaze without flinching. I want to fix the damn thing. We can run simulations, but I'd bet everything that if we test it under real-world conditions with the adjustments I'm suggesting, it'll hold. Ethan shook his head, smirking. A bet? That's what we're relying on now? Gut instincts over engineering. Call it what you want, Marcus shot back. But I know cars, Ethan. You know numbers. The tension in the room thickened. Isabella glanced between them before turning to the rest of the team. How fast can we run those tests? One of the engineers, a younger guy who had been taking notes, cleared his throat. We could recalibrate the prototype overnight and run tests first thing in the morning. If Marcus is right, we'll know before the end of the day. Isabella nodded, decisive. Then, that's what we'll do. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The meeting adjourned, the team dispersing, murmuring amongst themselves. Marcus barely had a chance to step out of the conference room before Ethan was beside him. Ethan crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Look, Carter, I don't have a problem with you personally. But we've got engineers who've spent years on this, and you come in, a few weeks, and suddenly you know better than everyone?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "Maybe you got lucky this time, but don't think that makes you one of us." Marcus turned to him, his patience running thin. "No, I think I'm a mechanic who knows what the hell he's talking about." Ethan let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "You can throw around as many ideas as you want, Carter, but at the end of the day, you'll never be one of us." Marcus felt the words like a punch to the ribs. He had been bracing for them since day one, but hearing them spoken so plainly still stung. But instead of reacting, he simply held Ethan's gaze, letting the silence stretch. Then, without a word, he walked away. The next 24 hours were a blur of activity. Marcus barely slept, working alongside the few engineers who were willing to give his theory a shot. Adjustments were made, simulations were run, and by morning the prototype was ready for real-world testing. The test track was cold in the early light, the asphalt slick with morning dew. The car sat waiting, its engine purring low and steady. Marcus stood with Isabella and the rest of the team as the test driver slid behind the wheel. Ethan was there too, arms crossed, watching with an expression that made it clear he was waiting for Marcus to fail. The car accelerated down the track, hitting the trouble speeds. For a second, everything seemed fine. Then, a sharp jolt. A minor instability, barely noticeable, but enough to make the test driver ease off the throttle. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Guess that settles it." But Marcus shook his head, already scanning the data. "No, it's close. The adjustment is working, but we need a second pass. The dampening settings need a slight recalibration." Another tweak, another test. The car took off again. This time, as it hit the critical speeds, the suspension held. Smooth, seamless. No failure. Marcus let out a slow breath as Isabella turned to the engineers. "Now that settles it. No instability, no failure." Marcus exhaled slowly as Isabella turned to the engineers. "Get me the full report," she ordered, then looked at Marcus. "You called it." Ethan's face was unreadable, but he said nothing. Back in the office later that afternoon, Marcus sat at his desk, exhausted but satisfied. He had proven himself, not just to them, to himself. His phone buzzed, and when he glanced at the screen, a single message from Isabella stared back at him. "Good work today. I hope you're starting to see what I saw in you." Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the words. For the first time since stepping into this building, he felt something shift. Maybe, just maybe, he belonged here after all. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.